Have you ever thought about when history, like the writing of it, actually began? Who were those first people thinking, hey, we should write this stuff down? Not just local stories, but, the bigger picture. Today we're looking at one of those absolute giants, a real pioneer. Herodotus, you've probably heard the name, often called the father of history, right? Cicero gave him that title. But it's more complicated than just a title. We want to understand the person behind this massive work, the histories, and why people still argue about him.
Exactly. Our aim is to look at Herodotus from different angles, using the information available. We'll try to pull out some surprising details, some key insights, really, to get a better picture of this ancient Greek historian and, well, his huge impact on how we even think about the past.
Okay, so let's start at the start. Where did this foundational historian actually come from? What was his early life like?
Right, so Herodotus was born around 484 BC in Halicarnassus. Now, Halicarnassus is modern Bodrum in Turkey. And the crucial thing, back then it was under Persian control.
Persian control. So he wasn't technically Greek in a political sense.
By birth, he was a subject of the Persian Empire.
Yeah.
And the sources suggest his family was important there. His father was Lixus, mother Dryo. He had a brother, Theodorus. And he was related to Panyasis, who was quite a famous epic poet at the time. What's really interesting, though, is this idea that he might have been part Quichurian, descended from the local people who had sort of adopted Greek ways. Names like Lixus, Panyasis, they aren't purely Greek names.
That whole context, the geography, the politics, important, doesn't it? A Greek city, but inside the Persian Empire. That must have given him a pretty unique perspective compared to someone, say, born in Athens or Sparta.
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't just where he lived. Being a Persian subject in a Greek city probably meant he was, well, bilingual, bicultural from the get-go. And Halicarnassus itself was a port city. Very outward-looking, lots of international contact. That kind of cosmopolitan environment, plus maybe family connections across the empire, almost certainly set the stage for all the traveling and research he did later. It gave him this lens, this ability to look at the huge clash between Greeks and Persians and sort of understand both sides, maybe even humanize them. That was incredibly rare back then.
And the language he wrote in Ionian Greek, that's always struck me as interesting because Halicarnassus was a Dorian city, wasn't it?
It was primarily Dorian, yes.
Some older sources, like the Suda, that huge Byzantine encyclopedia, they suggest he learned Ionian when he fled Halicarnassus, escaping a tyrant and went to Samos. Sounds very dramatic.
It does sound like a good story, doesn't it? A heroic exile narrative. But what's really fascinating is that recent archaeological finds, inscriptions from Halicarnassus, actually show that Ionic Greek was used there for official stuff.
This new evidence kind of challenges that romantic story. It suggests maybe Ionic was just part of his environment already, maybe a more practical reason for his choice of dialect rather than, this dramatic exile and return.
Okay, so his upbringing was definitely unique, but he clearly didn't stay put. The sources show him as this incredibly curious person traveling all over, almost like an early ethnographer, right? What do we know about where he went? And maybe more importantly, how did he actually get his work out there? No printing presses back then.
Well, his own writings confirm he traveled extensively. He definitely visited Egypt. He says so himself. That was probably after 454 BC. And it seems likely he went to Tyre in modern Lebanon and maybe down the Euphrates River, possibly even reaching Babylon.
And these weren't just sightseeing trips. These were research expeditions, basically. He was gathering information, collecting stories, interviewing priests, looking at monuments, trying to understand different cultures. Think about Egypt. He describes their animal worship, mummification, the Nile flooding, all with this intense curiosity. His travels were absolutely fundamental to the histories.
A proper ancient correspondent. And eventually he ends up in Athens. Around 447 BC, right when Athens was at its peak under Pericles, he apparently really admired Athens, its democracy. And they didn't just welcome him, they gave him a huge reward, 10 talents.
That's right, 10 talents.
What does that signify? I mean, that must have been an enormous amount of money.
It was astronomical. To give you an idea, it was enough to pay for a warship, a trireme, fully crewed, for a whole year. Or, put another way, maybe 100 years' wages for an ordinary worker.
So this wasn't just a small honorarium.
Not at all. Plutarch mentions it. It shows the Athenian state saw his work as incredibly valuable. A major contribution to, well, public knowledge, collective memory, maybe even good propaganda, reinforcing the Greek victory narrative. It really speaks to how much Athens valued intellectual achievement in that golden age.
So his work was clearly valued. Did he stay in Athens then?
Not permanently, it seems. Around 443 BC, he moved again, this time to Thurii, in southern Italy, modern Calabria. It was an Athenian-sponsored colony, part of what they called Magna Graecia, Greater Greece, a real melting pot of Greek culture abroad.
And he continued working there.
Apparently so. Aristotle actually calls him Herodotus of Thurium in one place, which suggests he became associated with his new home. We don't know exactly when he died, but there's nothing in his work that can be firmly dated later than 430 BC. So he likely finished the histories around then, maybe passing away before he turned 60. There's even a late source that claims he died childless, naming someone called Plesurus the Thessalian as his heir. A little personal detail amidst the grand narrative.
It's just amazing to think how he operated without modern communication. How did people actually hear his work? How did he publish the histories?
Primarily through public readings, oral recitations, often at big gatherings like festivals.
Like the Olympic Games, reading history there.
Exactly. Imagine that scene. Not just athletes, but intellectual performance too. Standing up and telling these epic stories to huge crowds, it must have been powerful, like performance art almost. The sources mention specific parts of his early books that seem designed for this almost like standalone performance pieces. Maybe legendary, maybe not, that Herodotus read the entire histories at the Olympics.
And there's that other famous story, maybe apocryphal, about the young Thucydides being in the audience.
Just a boy.
Right, the future historian.
Moved to tears by Herodotus's recitation. And Herodotus supposedly noticed him and said something prophetic like, "Your son's soul yearns for knowledge." Even if it's just a legend, it captures the impact these public readings must have had. It wasn't just about information, it was about creating this shared memory, this experience.
A powerful image. So with all this traveling, observing, reciting, what was the ultimate goal? What was he trying to do with the histories?
He tells us himself right at the start. His opening lines are remarkably clear about his purpose, he says, basically. This is the result of the inquiry Herodotus of Halicarnassus carried out. To stop human achievements fading over time, and to make sure the great deeds of both Greeks and non-Greeks are remembered. And importantly, to explain the cause of the conflict between them.
Preserve memory and explain the why, not just the what. So it wasn't just listing kings and battles, it was this much wider look at humanity, motivations, and including non-Greeks too, that feels significant for the time.
Precisely. The core narrative is the Greco-Persian Wars marathon, Thermopylae, Salamis, all that. But he constantly weaves in other material. You get deep explorations of culture, ethnography, geography, even his own thoughts on how history should be researched and told. It's all part of the package. He'll describe Egyptian religion in detail, or Sadean burial customs, or how the Babylonians built their walls, or speculate about the source of the Nile. These aren't just random tangents. They provide this incredibly rich context. They show the diversity of the world involved in that huge East-West clash.
That's such a broad scope for one person back then. So what does this mean for how we think about where recorded history actually comes from?
Well, if you look at the bigger picture, it's a massive shift. Before Herodotus, Greek history was mostly local legends, family stories, genealogies, things recorded by people called logographers, focusing on maybe one city or region. The Greco-Persian Wars, what he called the Wars of Liberation, seem to have given him this truly historical subject, something bigger than just one city-state. He saw this shared Greek identity emerging, this corporate life higher than that of the city, as one scholar put it, unified against Persia. His work really represents the birth of that historical spirit in Greece, trying to explain cause and effect on a grand international stage. It's like Clio, the muse of history, finally speaking up.
An incredible foundation. Groundbreaking stuff. He got called the father of lies. How do we square that? The great pioneer, but also supposedly a liar.
It's a crucial question, really. It gets into the nature of truth, historical standards even back then. Even people in his own time or shortly after criticized him. Thucydides, the historian who wrote about the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta.
Came just after Herodotus.
He pretty directly accused Herodotus of basically making things up or including fantastical stories just to entertain people. Herodotus's defense, implicitly in his work, was that he reported what he saw, what he was told, and sometimes he explicitly flags things he finds doubtful, presenting multiple versions. He often says, "I am obliged to report what I am told, but I am not obliged to believe it all."
So if he's upfront about reporting stories he heard, even unbelievable ones, is liar really the right word? Or maybe just a collector of everything? And it wasn't just serious historians criticizing him, was it? Didn't Aristophanes take a shot at him, too?
You're right about his method. He's often quite transparent. And yes, Aristophanes, the great comic playwright in Athens, definitely poked fun at him. Around 425 BC, in his play The Acharnians, he includes this joke blaming the huge Peloponnesian War on basically a squabble over the abduction of some prostitutes. Yes. And it was a clear satirical jab at Herodotus's own style. Because Herodotus begins the histories by reporting the Persian account of why East and West first clashed, which involved these mythical abductions of figures like Io and Europa, grand, epic, almost mythological origins for war. Aristophanes is basically saying, oh yeah, well this war started over something just as ridiculous. It shows Herodotus's narrative style, including those kinds of mystic prefaces, really stood out and was maybe seen as a bit much by some.
So some contemporaries saw him as maybe more of a storyteller, weaving in myths and hearsay, rather than a completely factual, rigorous historian, like a clash of styles starting right there.
Exactly. Thucydides is the prime example of the contrasting approach. He was trained in rhetoric, wanted his account to seem very controlled, very rational, focused on logos. He seemed to dislike Herodotus's digressions, his inclusion of multiple, sometimes conflicting oral accounts, felt it undermined authorial certainty. And Thucydides focused tightly on the Greek polis, the city-state, and its politics. That was history for him. But for Herodotus, remember, he grew up on that boundary between Greek and non-Greek worlds in Anatolia. For him, the interaction between cultures, the bigger picture, was absolutely central. Their backgrounds really shaped what they thought history was.
That makes sense. A fundamental difference in approach. So fast forward to now. How do modern historians see Herodotus? Those ancient criticisms still carry weight. Has his stock gone up or down?
Generally, modern historians see Herodotus as an invaluable source, really remarkable for his time. But yes, there's an understanding that not everything is perfectly accurate. There are exaggerations, inconsistencies. Some of that is probably down to relying on oral sources, which can be unreliable. Some might be his own interpretation, or just the sheer difficulty of verifying things across such distances back then. However, and this is important, a lot of what he wrote has been backed up by archaeology and other historical research.
Like what, for example?
Well, his descriptions of Egyptian monuments and customs often match archaeological findings quite well. Details about the Persian Empire's organization, Scythian burial mounds, things he described have been confirmed. So yes, he had a storyteller's flair. He included some wild tales, giant gold-digging ants, that kind of thing. But his core observations, his factual reporting, is often surprisingly solid. He was doing something new, blending observation, inquiry, and storytelling.
So bringing this all together, considering this really complex legacy, what does Herodotus mean for us today? This man who traveled, performed his work publicly, recorded huge events, but was hailed as a father figure and criticized as a fabulist.
I think his work fundamentally makes us think about how we record and interpret the past, even now. He wasn't afraid to include multiple viewpoints, even conflicting ones, even stories that seemed outlandish. He aimed for this incredibly broad, rich picture of the world, unlike many later historians who narrowed their focus. He gives us context, culture, motivation, not just events.
It really suggests that history isn't just this dry list of facts and dates. It's a narrative, isn't it? Woven from what people saw, what they heard, their cultural background, and inevitably the perspective of the person telling the story. It's alive.
Exactly. And maybe here's a final thought for you to consider. Herodotus, with all the praise and criticism, really highlights this ongoing challenge of historical truth. How do we today deal with the flood of information, the competing narratives, the incredible stories we encounter? How do we try to sift the reliable from the embellished, the fact from the error? His work and the debates around it from the very beginning pushes us to be critical consumers of every story, every account of the past that we receive.